The luxury sedan purred to a halt in our circular driveway, announcing Matthew's return from another important day at Westbrook Financial. I glanced at the clock, 6:43 p.m., which meant tonight was another corporate dinner he'd conveniently forgotten to mention. From my home office window, I watched him emerge, designer briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to his ear with the other, his tall frame draped in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most teachers make in a month. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Yes, Richard, we'll close the Anderson account by Friday, he declared loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. Their portfolio needs the kind of expertise only Westbrook can provide. I turned away from the window and surveyed my lesson plans spread across my desk, carefully crafted English literature curricula for tomorrow's sophomore and senior classes at Northridge Academy. 15 years I'd devoted to teaching, to opening young minds to the transformative power of literature. 15 years of early mornings and late nights, of weekends spent grading papers and summers dedicated to additional certifications. All to be dismissed by my husband of 7 years as playing school. The front door opened, and I heard Matthew's Italian leather shoes clicking against our marble foyer. "Olivia?" He called out, voice echoing through our expansive home, the home purchased primarily with my inheritance, though he conveniently forgot that detail whenever he referred to it as the house he provided. "In my office," I responded, quickly saving the feedback I'd been typing for Eliza Thompson's remarkable analysis of Toni Morrison's Beloved. Matthew appeared in the doorway, loosening his silk tie. At 43, he remained as handsome as the day we met at my best friend's gallery opening, salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, jaw still sharp, green eyes that had once looked at me with genuine admiration. Now, those eyes held something between amusement and condescension as they swept over my workspace. "Still working on your little lesson plans?" he asked, the corners of his mouth twitching. "I thought summer was your vacation time." I inhaled slowly, maintaining the composed expression I'd perfected over years of dealing with disruptive students. "Advanced placement curriculum development. The school pays extra for summer preparation, and my students consistently achieve the highest English literature AP scores in the district." He murmured, clearly unimpressed. "Well, I've got the Hendersons coming over tonight. Brian's considering moving his 8-figure portfolio to us. Thought I mentioned it." "You didn't," I said simply, closing my laptop. "What time?" 8. Matthew checked his Rolex, the watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday. "And Liv? Wear that blue dress, the one from Milan, and maybe mention your family's vineyard in Sonoma. Henderson fancies himself a wine connoisseur." I nodded, swallowing the retort that formed instinctively. My family's vineyard, another asset Matthew liked to casually drop into conversation, as though it somehow reflected on his success rather than mine. "Oh, and maybe don't go into too much detail about the teaching thing," he added, already turning to leave. "Last time you got started about some student's essay, I could see their eyes glazing over. Nobody wants to hear about teenage book reports when they're drinking 30-year-old scotch." Before I could respond, his phone rang and he was gone, voice dropping to the smooth, authoritative tone reserved for clients. I sat motionless, allowing the familiar humiliation to wash over me, marveling at how a man who once claimed to admire my intelligence and passion now treated my career as an embarrassing hobby. It hadn't always been this way. When we first met, Matthew had been a mid-level manager with ambition and charm in equal measure. He'd asked thoughtful questions about my teaching methods, even visited my classroom once to guest speak about financial literacy. He'd called me Professor Blackwood in bed sometimes, a playful acknowledgement of my academic nature that had felt like appreciation rather than mockery. The change had been gradual, so gradual I barely noticed it happening. A promotion to senior investment manager, a new circle of friends with wives who used to work but now focused on charity luncheons and tennis lessons. Then came the director position at Westbrook Financial, bringing with it a significant salary increase and an even more significant inflation of Matthew's ego. As my academic achievements grew, department chair, published articles in educational journals, an award for excellence in teaching, Matthew's interest waned proportionally. His new associates were men who measured success in profit margins and year-end bonuses, men who viewed education as a quaint but ultimately inconsequential field. I stood and walked to my closet to retrieve the requested blue dress, purchased during our anniversary trip to Italy 3 years ago. As I changed, I recalled last month's dinner party, the breaking point I hadn't yet acknowledged to myself. "So, Olivia, Matthew tells us you work at the local high school?" Miranda Peters had asked, her diamond earrings catching the light as she tilted her head in manufactured interest. "I'm the English department chair at Northridge Academy," I'd corrected gently. "I primarily teach advanced placement courses to juniors and seniors." "How rewarding," she'd replied with the patronizing smile reserved for people discussing charity work. "I sometimes think about volunteering to read to children. It must be so fulfilling." I'd opened my mouth to explain the difference between volunteer reading and designing university-level literature courses for gifted students when Matthew had interjected. "Olivia likes keeping busy," he'd said, refilling wine glasses around the table. "It's cute, really. While we're all stressing over million-dollar accounts, she's worrying about comma splices." The table had erupted in polite laughter, and I'd felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller in my chair as Matthew continued. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Last week, she was practically in tears over some student's college essay. Meanwhile, I'm restructuring the Henderson family's entire financial future. He'd placed his hand over mine in a gesture that appeared affectionate, but felt possessive. "But that's what I love about her. She gets so passionate about her pretend work." Pretend work? The words had escaped before I could stop them. "You know what I mean, honey," Matthew had said, squeezing my hand a little too tightly. "It's not like you're saving lives or moving markets. It's playing school, like you did when you were little, just with real teenagers now." More laughter had followed, and I'd forced a smile while something hardened inside me. Pretend work. The phrase had echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. I zipped the blue dress and examined my reflection in the full-length mirror. At 41, I still maintained the slim figure that had initially caught Matthew's eye, though the years had softened certain edges and etched fine lines around my brown eyes. My dark hair, once worn long, was now cut in a sophisticated bob that framed my face and required minimal maintenance. A practical choice for someone whose mornings began at 5:30 a.m. "Pretend work," I whispered to my reflection, watching as something shifted in my expression, a subtle hardening around the eyes, a slight straightening of the shoulders. 7 years of gradually increasing belittlement. 7 years of watching Matthew transform from a partner who valued my contributions to a man who viewed my career as an adorable distraction. My phone chimed with a notification. I picked it up, expecting another demand from Matthew about tonight's dinner, but instead saw an email from Principal Harrison, "Olivia. The board unanimously approved your proposal for the Distinguished Visiting Scholars Program. Full funding has been allocated, and you'll have complete autonomy in developing the curriculum and selecting participants. This is a groundbreaking initiative for a public high school, and your vision impressed everyone involved. Additionally, the superintendent has requested that you present your model at the National Education Conference in December. Your innovative approach to integrating university-level discourse into secondary education has garnered significant attention. We're fortunate to have an educator of your caliber at Northridge. Thomas Harrison. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading the email twice more. The Distinguished Visiting Scholars Program had been my passion project for 3 years. A proposal to bring renowned academics into high school classrooms, creating a bridge between secondary and higher education. I'd written grants, conducted research, developed assessment metrics, and presented to countless committees, and Matthew had no idea. I'd stopped sharing my professional achievements with him around the time he'd started referring to my classroom as my little kingdom in that indulgently patronizing tone. I heard the shower running, in the master bathroom and knew I had approximately 12 minutes before Matthew emerged to dress for the evening. 12 minutes to make a decision that had been forming in my subconscious for months. I walked back to my office and opened my laptop, quickly locating the folder labeled Opportunity. Inside were emails and documents I'd been collecting but hadn't yet acted upon, correspondence from the National Board of Education, the Institute for Advanced Teaching Methods, and most significantly, from Cambridge University's Department of Educational Innovation, Dr. Olivia Blackwood. Following our conversations at the International Education Symposium, we would like to formally invite you to join Cambridge University as a visiting fellow for the upcoming academic year. Your groundbreaking work in advanced secondary education methodologies aligns perfectly with our department's research initiatives. This position would involve a one-year residence in Cambridge, during which you would lecture, conduct research, and collaborate with our faculty on developing new approaches to bridging the gap between secondary and university education. The fellowship includes a generous stipend, accommodation in historic St. Catherine's College, and all associated research funds. Given your current position, we understand this would require a leave of absence from Northridge Academy, but Principal Harrison has already expressed his enthusiastic support. He was, in fact, one of your references. We require your decision by August 15th. Sincerely, Dr. Eleanor Whitman, Director, Department of Educational Innovation, Cambridge University Today, was August 7th. I had 8 days to decide whether to accept an opportunity that would transform my career and require relocating to England for a year. 8 days to determine if my marriage was worth salvaging, or if Matthew's dismissal of my life's work had irreparably damaged what we once shared. The shower stopped. 6 minutes remaining. My fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard as I composed a response to Dr. Whitman, informing her that I was still considering the offer and would provide my final decision within the week. I hesitated before adding, "Personal circumstances require careful consideration, but I remain extremely interested in the position." As I pressed send, I heard Matthew moving around in our bedroom. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, formulating a plan that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Tonight, I would play the role Matthew expected, the supportive wife with the quaint teaching job, the gracious hostess who mentioned her family's vineyard at appropriate intervals. But beginning tomorrow, I would execute a carefully crafted lesson plan of my own, one designed to teach my husband exactly how pretend my work really was. The doorbell rang precisely at 8 o'clock. I descended the staircase to find Matthew already greeting Brian and Elaine Henderson in the foyer. Brian was exactly as I'd imagined, mid-50s, expensively dressed in a casual way that suggested comfortable wealth, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Elaine was perhaps 10 years younger, blonde and slender, wearing a simple but unmistakably designer black dress adorned with a single strand of pearls. "And here's my lovely wife," Matthew announced as I reached the bottom step. "Brian, Elaine, this is Olivia." I extended my hand with a warm smile. "Welcome to our home. I've heard so much about you both." "Matthew speaks highly of you," Brian replied, his handshake firm but not aggressive. "Says you're quite the hostess." "Among other things," I replied lightly, catching the brief flicker of warning in Matthew's eyes. "Shall we have drinks in the living room? I believe Matthew has selected some special scotch for the occasion." "A 30-year Macallan," Matthew confirmed, placing his hand at the small of my back to guide me toward the living room, a subtle reminder to follow his script. The evening proceeded predictably. Matthew dominated the conversation, expertly weaving narratives of financial acumen and strategic brilliance. Brian responded with his own tales of business prowess, while Elaine and I were expected to provide appreciative laughter and occasional questions that allowed our husbands to elaborate further. Olivia's family owns a vineyard in Sonoma, Matthew mentioned casually as he poured Brian another scotch. "Blackwood Estates? Perhaps you've heard of it?" Brian's eyebrows raised with genuine interest. "The Blackwood Cabernet? Remarkable vintage. I have several bottles in my collection." My grandfather started with just 10 acres in 1952, I said, seizing the moment. He was a professor of agricultural science who decided to apply his research practically. Education and application, he always said one without the other was incomplete. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, Elaine commented. The first unprompted contribution she'd made all evening. He was, I agreed. He taught at Stanford for 40 years while building the vineyard on weekends and summers. Most people told him he was wasting his talents on playing farmer when he should focus on his real job in academia. I felt Matthew stiffen beside me, recognizing the parallel I was drawing. Clearly they were wrong, Brian said, oblivious to the tension. Blackwood produces some of the finest wines in California now. Yes, I smiled, meeting Matthew's eyes directly. He understood that real value isn't always recognized immediately by others. The conversation shifted as Matthew quickly steered it back to investment opportunities. Dinner was served, a catered affair Matthew had arranged without consulting me. And business talk continued uninterrupted through 3 expertly prepared courses. As I cleared dessert plates, Elaine offered to help, following me into the kitchen. I understand you're a teacher? She asked once we were alone, her voice carrying genuine curiosity. Yes, English literature at Northridge Academy, I replied, placing dishes in the sink. My sister is an elementary school principal in Seattle, she said, leaning against the counter. Hardest working person I know. 20-hour days during the school year, summers filled with preparation and professional development. I looked at her with newfound interest. Most people don't understand what education actually entails. Most people are idiots, Elaine stated flatly, then smiled. No offense to our husbands. I laughed, a genuine laugh for the first time that evening. How long have you and Brian been married? 12 years. Second marriage for both of us. She accepted the coffee cup I offered. When we met, I was running my own graphic design firm. Sold it when we got married, Brian's idea. Said I wouldn't need to work anymore. Do you miss it? I asked, already knowing the answer from the wistful look in her eyes. Every day, she admitted. I serve on 3 charity boards now, which Brian calls my productive hobby. As if designing award-winning marketing campaigns was equivalent to arranging flowers. We shared a look of perfect understanding before returning to the dining room with coffee. The men were deep in conversation about tax shelters, barely acknowledging our return. Olivia could show you her office before you go, Matthew suggested as the evening wound down. She's quite proud of her little workspace. The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable, and I saw Elaine's eyebrow raise slightly. I'd love to see it, she said, standing. Brian, you and Matthew finished discussing the Peterson account. Olivia can give me the tour. In my office, Elaine immediately gravitated toward the wall of framed achievements I'd accumulated over 15 years. Teaching certifications, awards, published articles, and photographs with notable authors who had visited my classroom. Innovative approaches to teaching. Critical analysis in secondary education, she read from one framed journal article. Published in the Harvard Educational Review? She turned to me with widened eyes. That's incredibly prestigious. Thank you, I said simply, watching as she continued examining the evidence of my career. National Educator of the Year finalist, she noted, pointing to another certificate. Olivia, these are remarkable accomplishments. My pretend work, I said with a small smile. She turned, comprehension dawning on her face. Ah, one of those husbands. Before I could respond, Matthew appeared in the doorway. The Hendersons are leaving, Olivia. We returned to the foyer for goodbyes, where Brian shook my hand with noticeably more respect than he'd shown upon arrival. Elaine tells me you're quite the academic star, he commented. Harvard publications, national recognition, impressive credentials. Matthew's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Olivia keeps busy with her teaching. We're very proud of her extracurricular accomplishments. Hardly extracurricular, Elaine interjected smoothly. Olivia's work in education reform sounds groundbreaking. I'd love to hear more about it sometime. Absolutely, I agreed. enjoying the confusion flickering across Matthew's face. Perhaps lunch next week? After they departed, Matthew loosened his tie with a satisfied sigh. That went perfectly. Henderson practically committed to transferring his full portfolio tonight. That's wonderful, I replied, slipping off my heels. Elaine is lovely, quite accomplished in her own right before she gave up her award-winning design firm. Matthew waved dismissively. She made greeting cards or something. Henderson set her up with a generous allowance. She doesn't need to work. Graphic design, I corrected. And need isn't always the point, is it? Matthew eyed me curiously. You're in a strange mood tonight. Everything okay? Everything's fine, I assured him, heading toward the stairs. Just thinking about some pretend work I need to finish before my pretend job starts up again next week. Liv, come on, he sighed, following me. You know I didn't mean anything by that comment. It was just business talk. I paused on the stairs, turning to look down at him. What exactly do you think I do all day, Matthew? He blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. You teach kids about books. I know it's important and you're good at it. That's what you think teaching literature involves? Teaching kids about books? Well, yeah, he shrugged. You read stuff, talk about themes and symbolism, grade some papers. I'm not saying it's not valuable, just that it's, different from what I do. Different how? Liv, it's late. Can we not do this now? I've had a long day of real-world pressure, million-dollar decisions, clients' futures in my hands. And I haven't? I asked quietly. He laughed, actually laughed, and spread his hands. Come on, honey. You can't seriously compare teaching Romeo and Juliet to managing investment portfolios worth more than you'll earn in your entire teaching career. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a clarity of purpose and a certainty about the path forward. You're right, I said, surprising him. No point discussing it tonight. I'm tired too. Relief washed over his face. Thank you for understanding. The Henderson dinner was important and you were perfect. As always. I nodded and continued up the stairs, my mind already mapping out the lesson plan that would begin tomorrow, a comprehensive unit on respect, value, and the true meaning of work, customized specifically for an audience of one. In our bedroom, I removed the blue dress and hung it carefully in my closet. As Matthew showered again before bed, his second of the evening, a habit from his college athlete days, I opened my laptop and wrote a brief email to Principal Harrison accepting the additional responsibility of mentoring new teachers in the department, a role that would require me to arrive at school by 6:30 a.m. for the next 2 weeks of summer preparation. I then wrote to Dr. Whitman at Cambridge, requesting a video conference to discuss specific details of the fellowship before making my final decision. Finally, I sent a message to my brother Michael, who managed our family's vineyard, asking for current production figures and financial statements, information I hadn't requested in years, having been content to receive quarterly summaries and annual disbursements. Matthew emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, water droplets still clinging to his chest. He'd maintained his physique well over the years, and despite everything, I felt the familiar flicker of attraction that had never fully disappeared. Early day tomorrow? He asked, noticing I'd already set my alarm. Yes, meeting with new teachers, I replied. I'll be gone before you wake up. He nodded absently, already checking his phone for messages. I've got a breakfast meeting with the regional director, then lunch with Henderson to finalize details. Probably another late evening. Quarterly projections are due Friday. I slipped into bed, watching as he placed his Rolex carefully on the nightstand. Matthew, when was the last time you came to one of my events at school? The literary symposium or the author series? He paused, brow furrowing as he searched his memory. The Christmas thing last year? That was 2 years ago, I corrected. And it was the Winter Arts Showcase, not specific to my department. He slid into bed beside me, setting his phone aside. I've been busy, Liv. The director promotion, the new client portfolio, you know how it is. I do know, I said, turning off my bedside lamp. I understand exactly how it is. Matthew reached for me in the darkness, his hand finding my waist. You're not really upset about that pretend work comment, are you? It was just guy talk. I didn't pull away but didn't respond to his touch either. I'm not upset. I'm just thinking. About what? His hand moved higher, brushing the underside of my breast. About how little you know about my world, I said simply, and how much I'm looking forward to showing it to you. His hand stilled. What does that mean? It means good night, Matthew, I replied, turning away from him. I have pretend work in the morning. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt him shift restlessly beside me, undoubtedly confused by my uncharacteristic response. In the 7 years of our marriage, I had never directly challenged his dismissive attitude toward my career. I had smiled tightly through countless dinner parties where my profession was treated as an adorable quirk. I had accepted his gradual transformation from supportive partner to condescending provider. But something had fundamentally shifted, and as I planned the lessons that would either save or end my marriage, I realized that regardless of the outcome, I would never again allow anyone, especially not my husband, to diminish the value of my life's work. Tomorrow, the real teaching would begin. I awoke before my alarm, the early summer sun barely illuminating the room through the gaps in the curtains. Matthew slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and regular. For a moment I studied his face, relaxed in sleep. He looked more like the man I'd fallen in love with, before success had hardened his features with a permanent expression of superiority. Silently, I slipped from the bed and prepared for the day, selecting a sleek pencil skirt and silk blouse rather than the casual attire I typically wore for summer preparation days. If I was going to begin reshaping Matthew's perception of my profession, presentation mattered, a principle I taught my students when preparing them for debate competitions. I left a note on the kitchen counter, a deviation from our usual routine, as Matthew rarely required explanation of my whereabouts. Early meeting with new department members. Principal Harrison has asked me to deliver the keynote at next week's district-wide professional development conference. Dinner meeting tonight with the Cambridge University representative, discussing my potential fellowship. Don't wait up. Oh, the mention of Cambridge was deliberate. The first piece of bait in my carefully constructed lesson plan. I placed my brother's business card for Blackwood Estates beside the note, another calculated component of the day's instruction. As I backed my modest sedan out of the garage, I glanced at our house, a 4,500 square foot contemporary overlooking Lake Washington, purchased primarily with my inheritance and vineyard income, though Matthew had long since begun referring to it as an achievement of his career success. The irony wasn't lost on me that my pretend work, combined with my family assets, had provided the foundation for the lifestyle that Matthew now used as evidence of his superior professional value. At 6:25 a.m., I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot at Northridge Academy. The campus was quiet, peaceful in the early morning light, a sprawling collection of buildings surrounding a central quadrangle, the architecture blending traditional brick structures with modern glass additions funded by the technology companies that had transformed our region. Principal Harrison's car was already there, as expected. Thomas Harrison had been a mentor and ally throughout my 15 years at Northridge, recognizing my potential early and consistently supporting my innovative approaches to education. I found him in his office, gray hair slightly disheveled, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. "Olivia," he greeted me warmly, standing as I entered. "Early as usual. Coffee?" "Please," I accepted, taking a seat across from his desk. "Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice." "Of course." He poured 2 cups from the carafe on his credenza. "Your email sounded important. Is everything all right?" I took a breath, organizing my thoughts. I've been offered a visiting fellowship at Cambridge for the upcoming academic year. Thomas's eyebrows rose, but his expression was one of pride rather than surprise. "Dr. Whitman mentioned they were considering you." "That's extraordinary, Olivia, a tremendous honor." "I haven't accepted yet," I clarified. "It would mean taking a leave of absence, and there are personal considerations." He nodded, understanding immediately. "Matthew?" "Yes." I sipped my coffee, grateful for Thomas's perception. As both my supervisor and friend, he was one of the few people who had witnessed Matthew's gradual transformation from supportive spouse to condescending critic. "And you want my advice?" he asked. "I want to know if the position would still be available if I deferred for a year," I replied. "I need some time to clarify certain aspects of my personal life before making such a significant career move." Thomas studied me carefully. "This is about more than just logistics, isn't it?" "It's about respect," I said simply, "and understanding the true value of what I do." He nodded slowly. "You know, when I first started teaching 40 years ago, my father-in-law asked when I was going to get a real job. He was a banker, saw education as glorified babysitting. 3 decades later, when his grandson, my nephew, got into Princeton largely due to a recommendation letter from me, he finally acknowledged that perhaps my little teaching job carried some weight after all. I smiled, recognizing my own situation in his story. "Did that change your relationship?" "It clarified it," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "Made me realize I'd never needed his validation in the first place." He leaned forward. "What's your timeline for decision?" 8 days for Cambridge." As for Matthew, I shrugged. "That depends on how quickly he learns." Thomas chuckled. "Having been on the receiving end of your instructional methods during department evaluations, I don't envy him the experience." His expression grew serious. "Whatever you decide, your position here is secure. A leave of absence for a prestigious fellowship only enhances our institution's reputation. And if you need flexibility in the coming weeks to sort through your options, consider it granted." "Thank you." I stood, genuinely moved by his support. "One more thing. I'd like to invite Matthew to the district conference next week. I think it's time he saw this side of my professional life." "Of course. I'll have Diane add him to the VIP list." Thomas's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Perhaps we'll seat him with Superintendent Rollins. She's particularly eloquent about the critical value of literary education in developing future leaders." As new teachers began arriving for orientation, I shifted into my professional role, confident, authoritative, expertly guiding young educators through the complexities of curriculum development and classroom management. By noon, I had conducted 3 workshops, mentored 5 new department members, and finalized the agenda for the upcoming literary symposium. During my lunch break, I called my brother Michael, who managed our family vineyard. "Twice in 1 week? To what do I owe the pleasure?" He teased upon answering. "I need a favor," I replied, getting straight to the point. "The quarterly reports for Blackwood Estates, can you send them directly to my home address? Physical copies, not just the electronic versions." "Sure," he agreed, though confusion colored his voice. "Any particular reason? You've never wanted the detailed financials before." "Let's just say I'm taking a more active interest in my inheritance," I explained. "Also, if Matthew calls asking questions about the vineyard, refer him directly to me." A moment of silence followed before Michael spoke again, his tone more serious. "Is everything okay between you two?" "That depends on how the next few weeks unfold," I answered honestly. "I'm conducting an educational experiment." "Those poor students of yours," my brother laughed, relief evident in his voice. "Always being subjected to your experimental teaching methods." "This time it's just 1 student," I corrected. "And he's long overdue for some remedial instruction." After ending the call, I checked my email to find Dr. Whitman had agreed to a video conference at 7:00 p.m. that evening. Perfect timing to ensure Matthew would be home to overhear portions of the conversation. Additionally, the National Education Board had requested my presence at their upcoming symposium on revolutionizing secondary education, another prestigious invitation that would fit neatly into my lesson plan for Matthew. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with curriculum planning and department budget reviews. At 5:30 p.m., I gathered my materials and headed home, deliberately timing my arrival to coincide with Matthew's usual return from the office. As expected, his car was already in the garage when I pulled in. I found him in the kitchen, still in his suit trousers and dress shirt, sleeves rolled up as he poured himself a scotch. "You're home early," I commented. setting my briefcase on the counter. He turned, surprise evident on his face. I could say the same to you. Your note said not to wait up. Change of plans. Dr. Whitman agreed to a video conference tonight instead of dinner. I removed my laptop from my briefcase. We'll be discussing the specifics of the Cambridge Fellowship. Matthew's brow furrowed. Cambridge Fellowship? What are you talking about? I met his gaze steadily. Cambridge University has invited me to be a visiting fellow in their Department of Educational Innovation for the upcoming academic year. It's quite prestigious. They only select one international educator annually. He stared at me, processing this information. You'd move to England? For how long? 1 year, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. The position includes a stipend, accommodation, research funding, and lecture opportunities throughout Europe. And when exactly were you planning to discuss this with me? The edge in his voice was unmistakable, not anger, precisely, but the indignation of someone who believes their permission should have been sought. I'm discussing it with you now, I pointed out calmly. I haven't accepted yet. I have until the 15th to decide. Decide? Liv, you can't seriously be considering this. He set his glass down with more force than necessary. You have a life here, responsibilities. Yes, I do. And one of those responsibilities is to my profession and my ongoing development as an educator. I opened the refrigerator, assessing dinner options. The fellowship would significantly advance my research on bridging secondary and university education methodologies. Matthew ran a hand through his hair, his confusion evident. I don't understand. Where is this coming from? You've never mentioned Cambridge or fellowships or any of this, haven't I? I selected ingredients for a simple salad. That's interesting. Considering the invitation came after my presentation at the International Education Symposium 4 months ago, an event I specifically asked you to attend. The conference in Seattle? Liv, I had the Richardson merger that weekend. You know how important that was for the firm? Yes, I remember. I began washing lettuce, my movements deliberate. Just as I remember the department award ceremony you missed last year, and the author series I coordinated the year before that, and the countless other professional achievements you've deemed insufficiently important to acknowledge. Matthew's expression hardened. That's not fair. I've always supported your teaching. My pretend work, I corrected quietly. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before recovering. It was a joke, Olivia. Client banter. You're blowing it completely out of proportion. Am I? I set the knife down and turned to face him fully. Then perhaps you can explain exactly what my job entails, since you understand it so well. What? Describe my daily professional responsibilities, I clarified. In detail. He stared at me, clearly caught off guard. You're a teacher. You teach literature to high school students. That's my title and basic function. I'm asking what that actually involves. The specific tasks and responsibilities that comprise my workday. Matthew shifted uncomfortably, reaching for his scotch. You prepare lessons, grade papers, lead classroom discussions. I don't see... What lessons am I preparing currently? Which texts am I teaching this semester? What assessment methodologies do I use? How many students are in my average class? What administrative responsibilities do I hold beyond classroom instruction? How would I know these things? He demanded, defensive now. I don't interrogate you about the minutiae of your job. No, I agreed. You simply dismiss it as inconsequential without bothering to understand it at all. That's not... The chime of my laptop interrupted. Him, Dr. Whitman, calling precisely at 7 p.m. We'll continue this discussion later, I said, moving to the living room with my computer. This is important. I settled on the sofa and accepted the video call, aware that Matthew had followed me and was hovering just within earshot, pretending to examine our bookshelf while listening intently. Dr. Blackwood, wonderful to see you again, Eleanor Whitman greeted me, her British accent crisp over the connection. With her silver hair styled in an elegant bob and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, she embodied the image of distinguished academia. Likewise, Dr. Whitman, thank you for accommodating my schedule. Not at all. We're quite eager to finalize arrangements for your fellowship. The department is particularly interested in your methodologies for implementing university-level critical analysis in secondary education environments. For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Whitman and I discussed the specifics of the fellowship, lecture requirements, research objectives, publishing opportunities, and collaboration with Cambridge faculty. Throughout the conversation, I maintained a level of professional discourse that deliberately highlighted the complexity and significance of my work, aware that Matthew was absorbing every word while pretending to read book titles. Your Distinguished Visitors Program at Northridge is precisely the kind of innovative approach we wish to study further, Dr. Whitman noted. The preliminary data showing increased college readiness is particularly compelling. Thank you. The program has been my focus for the past 3 years. We've seen remarkable improvements in critical thinking metrics among participants. As the conversation continued, I noticed Matthew's posture changing, subtle shifts that suggested growing discomfort with the realization that my professional work extended far beyond his simplistic conception of teaching kids about books. When the call ended, I closed my laptop and turned to find Matthew watching me openly, his expression unreadable. So, he said finally, Cambridge, I confirmed, making no effort to elaborate further. You never mentioned you were being considered for something like this. I've mentioned many professional developments over the years, Matthew. You rarely express interest. I stood, gathering my materials. I need to prepare for tomorrow. I'm delivering the keynote address at the district conference next week, and the preliminary draft is due to the superintendent by Friday. The superintendent, he repeated, as though testing the significance of the word. Of schools? Yes, Matthew. The superintendent of the entire district. My superior's superior, essentially. I paused at the foot of the stairs. By the way, you're invited to attend the conference. Principal Harrison has added you to the VIP list. Me? Why would I attend a teacher's conference? Why indeed? I replied. It's only pretend work, after all. Nothing like the real-world importance of investment portfolios. Before he could respond, I continued up the stairs, leaving him standing in the living room with an expression I'd rarely seen on his face: uncertainty. In our bedroom, I changed into comfortable clothes and spread my materials across the bed, beginning work on my keynote address, Redefining Excellence, Transformative Approaches to Literary Education in the Modern Era. As I wrote, I could hear Matthew moving around downstairs, opening and closing cabinets with more force than necessary, signs of his unsettled state. Eventually, he appeared in the doorway, having changed into casual clothes himself. He leaned against the frame, watching me work for several moments before speaking. I called Michael. I looked up, feigning surprise. My brother, why? He mentioned you'd asked for the full financial reports from the vineyard. Matthew studied me carefully. Said you're taking a more active interest in your inheritance. That's correct. Care to explain why? You've been content with the quarterly summaries for years. I set my pen down and met his gaze directly. Let's just say recent events have prompted me to reevaluate certain aspects of my life, including my financial assets. A flicker of alarm crossed his features. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm conducting a comprehensive assessment of value, Matthew. Professional, personal, and financial. It seemed appropriate to have complete information about all 3 areas. He stepped into the room, tension evident in his movements. Is this about that stupid comment at the dinner party? Because if you're planning some kind of, financial power play over a momentary lapse in judgment. This isn't about power, I interrupted calmly. It's about accuracy. About ensuring that perceptions align with reality. And what reality is that? The reality of what my pretend work actually entails, I replied. The reality of my professional standing. The reality of my contributions to education, to our marriage, to our financial stability. Matthew's jaw tightened. I've never questioned your contributions, Olivia. Haven't you? I gathered my papers, organizing them methodically. When you tell your colleagues that I play school while you manage million-dollar accounts, What exactly would you call that besides questioning my contributions? It was a joke, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. Then you'll appreciate the humor in what comes next, I said, my tone mild despite the challenge in my words. Consider it a practical lesson in educational assessment, specifically the evaluation of previously unexamined assumptions. What does that mean? Wariness had crept into his voice. I smiled, not unkindly, but with firm resolve. It means your education begins tomorrow, Matthew. I suggest you prepare accordingly. As he stared at me in confused frustration, I returned to my work, effectively dismissing him from my attention. After a moment, he retreated from the room, and I heard him descend the stairs, likely seeking refuge in his home office where the complexities of financial statements would provide comforting familiarity. I continued working on my keynote address, my determination solidifying with each word I wrote. The next phase of my lesson plan would begin tomorrow, a comprehensive practical demonstration of exactly how pretend my work really was, and a long overdue education for the man who had spent years dismissing my profession while enjoying the benefits it provided. Whether our marriage survived this remedial course remained to be seen, but one outcome was certain. By the time this lesson concluded, Matthew would never again mistake teaching for playing. I awoke at 5:15 a.m. the next morning, careful not to disturb Matthew as I slipped from bed. By the time he shuffled into the kitchen at 7:30, I was already dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair perfectly styled, makeup precise, my professional armor. "You're up early," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. "Actually, this is my normal schedule during the school year," I replied, gathering my materials. "I'm typically at Northridge by 6:30. He paused mid-pour. "Every day? That's insane." "That's teaching," I corrected. "At least, that's teaching when you're department chair, AP coordinator, and mentor to new faculty." Before he could respond, I slid an envelope across the counter. "Your schedule for today?" "My what?" He picked it up, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. "You mentioned wanting to understand my little teaching job better. I've arranged for you to do exactly that." I checked my watch. "You should change. Business casual is appropriate. We don't want the students thinking you're an administrator." Matthew opened the envelope and scanned the contents, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "You can't be serious. I have meetings today. Important clients. More important than your wife's career?" I interjected smoothly. "Because that's what this week is about, Matthew. Understanding the value of what I do." "Liv, I can't just drop everything to play school for a day." I smiled tightly at his choice of words. "Interesting. I've managed to attend countless firm dinners, client events, and corporate functions over the years, often rearranging my professional responsibilities to accommodate yours. Yet you can't spare a single day to understand mine?" He stared at me, caught between irritation and guilt. "Fine," he conceded finally. "One day, to prove I support you." "Wonderful." I picked up my briefcase. "I'll meet you at Northridge at 9:30. The address is on the schedule along with parking instructions. Don't be late. Punctuality is fundamental in education." Matthew arrived at Northridge Academy at 9:28, his reluctance evident in his stiff posture as he entered the administration building where I waited with Principal Harrison. "Mr. Blackwood." Thomas greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "Delighted you could join us today. Your wife is one of our most valuable faculty members." "So I'm learning," Matthew replied with forced cordiality, shooting me a look that promised future discussion. "Olivia has arranged quite the educational experience for you," Thomas continued, clearly enjoying his role in my lesson plan. "I've granted her complete scheduling autonomy for your visit." "How generous," Matthew murmured. "Shall we begin?" I gestured toward the hallway. "We're starting with my AP Literature seminar, senior students discussing complex literary analysis. I believe you'll find it illuminating." As we walked through the bustling corridors, I watched Matthew taking in the environment, the sophisticated academic displays, the respectful greetings from students and faculty, the obvious professionalism that permeated the campus. In my classroom, a spacious, well-appointed room with walls lined with books and student work. 22 seniors were already engaged in pre-class discussion when we entered. They immediately stood, a courtesy I had instituted years ago. "Good morning, Dr. Blackwood," they chorused. "Good morning," I replied. "Please welcome my husband, Mr. Blackwood, who will be observing today," nodding politely to Matthew. I directed him to a chair at the rear of the room and immediately launched into the day's topic: comparative analysis of power dynamics in King Lear and the Tempest. For 90 minutes, I guided my students through a rigorous examination of Shakespearean authority structures, challenging their interpretations, pushing them toward deeper analysis, and maintaining absolute command of the material and the classroom. The discussion was collegiate level, fact evidenced by the complexity of the students' observations and the sophistication of their critical approaches. Throughout, I was aware of Matthew's growing astonishment as he witnessed not the simplistic teaching kids about books he had imagined, but rather a masterclass in literary criticism that would challenge many university professors. When the bell rang, several students approached my desk with additional questions, eager to continue the discussion despite the period ending. I addressed each thoughtfully, demonstrating the individualized attention that characterized my teaching methodology. As the last student departed, Matthew approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. "That was not what I expected," he admitted. "No?" I gathered my materials calmly. "What were you expecting? Finger painting and story time?" He had the decency to look embarrassed. "I just didn't realize the level of... that was basically a college seminar." Yes, it was. My AP students consistently score in the top percentile nationally, and most enter university with sophomore-level credits already secured. I checked the schedule. "We have 15 minutes before my next class. I thought you might enjoy meeting some colleagues." In the faculty lounge, I introduced Matthew to several department heads: Dr. Rivera from mathematics, Dr. Chen from sciences, and Professor Winters from classical languages. All held PhDs from prestigious universities and had chosen secondary education despite numerous opportunities in higher academia. "What draws someone with your credentials to high school teaching?" Matthew asked Dr. Chen, genuine curiosity in his voice. "The opportunity to shape developing minds at a critical stage," she replied without hesitation. "University students have largely established their intellectual patterns. Here, we can fundamentally influence how students approach complex problems for the rest of their lives." Matthew nodded slowly, processing this perspective that so obviously contradicted his assumptions about secondary education. The remainder of the morning continued similarly, Matthew observing my sophomore honors class, sitting in on my department meeting where we discussed curriculum innovations, and accompanying me to lunch with the superintendent who had specifically requested my input on district-wide literary initiatives. By mid-afternoon, when I led a professional development workshop for new teachers, Matthew's attitude had shifted noticeably. He watched with undisguised interest as I demonstrated sophisticated teaching methodologies, his earlier reluctance replaced by growing engagement. "Final item on today's schedule," I announced as we left the workshop. "My office hours for student consultations." For the next 2 hours, Matthew observed as I met with a succession of students, discussing everything from college application essays to research methodologies for independent study projects. The level of mentorship and individualized guidance I provided clearly surprised him, especially when one student tearfully credited my intervention with saving her academic career after a family crisis had derailed her studies. At 5:30 p.m., as I concluded my final consultation, Matthew leaned against the doorframe of my office, studying me with new eyes. "Is this a typical day for you?" he asked quietly. "Actually, it's somewhat lighter than usual," I replied, gathering my belongings. During regular sessions, I'd have after-school committee meetings, paper grading, and curriculum development to complete before heading home. "When do you sleep?" The question wasn't entirely facetious. "The same time as most working professionals," I answered, leading him toward the parking lot. "Though during midterms and finals, that's negotiable." In the car, Matthew was uncharacteristically silent, staring out the window as we drove home. Finally, as we turned onto our street, he spoke. "I didn't know," he said simply. "You never asked," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You assumed." "That's fair," he conceded, surprising me. "I made assumptions based on, I don't know, outdated stereotypes maybe. The reality is much more impressive." "Thank you for acknowledging that." I pulled into our driveway. "But today was just part one of your education. There's more?" He looked simultaneously wary and intrigued. "Tomorrow, we discuss finances." The next morning, I laid 3 folders on our dining room table as Matthew sipped his coffee. Having called in to reschedule his meetings for a second day, he appeared more willing than reluctant, a promising development. "What's all this?" he asked, eyeing the materials. "A comprehensive breakdown of our respective financial contributions," I explained, opening the first folder. "Let's begin with income." For the next hour, I methodically walked him through a detailed financial analysis, my teaching salary and benefits, the substantial income from my family's vineyard, and the investment portfolio I had independently maintained since before our marriage. "I had no idea the vineyard generated this much," Matthew admitted, examining the quarterly reports my brother had delivered overnight. "And your investment returns are extremely competitive." "I've been managing my own finances since I was 22, I reminded him. "My father insisted all 3 of us children understand money management before inheriting any portion of the family business." I turned to the second folder. Now, our home and lifestyle expenses. The documentation clearly showed that while Matthew's income was certainly significant, our lifestyle, the house, the luxury vehicles, the artwork, the exclusive neighborhood, was primarily supported by my inheritance and vineyard income, not his corporate salary. "The down payment on this house came entirely from my accounts," I pointed out, as did the renovations last year and the landscaping the year before that. Matthew's expression had grown increasingly somber as the financial reality became undeniable. "I never realized the proportions were so uneven." "That's because we've never discussed it," I said. "I've always viewed our marriage as a partnership, not a competition. But when you dismiss my career as pretend work while positioning yourself as the primary provider, it's inaccurate," he finished quietly. "And unfair." I nodded, relieved that he was absorbing the lesson without defensiveness. The third folder contains something different. Documented instances where my professional network has directly benefited your career. He looked up sharply. "What? Richard Hendricks, your biggest client?" "His daughter was my student 3 years ago. I helped her secure admission to Princeton despite her struggles with standardized testing." I opened the folder. "The Wilson account you're so proud of?" "Margaret Wilson serves on the school board with me. The initial introduction came through my professional connections, not your firm's reputation." Matthew stared at the documentation, recognition dawning in his eyes. "I remember now. You mentioned knowing Margaret from some committee. The Academic Excellence Committee, yes." I closed the folders. "My point isn't to diminish your professional accomplishments, Matthew. You're excellent at what you do, but so am I, and my work has value beyond what you've acknowledged." He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "I've been an ass, haven't I?" The blunt admission surprised me. "That's one way to put it. Why didn't you say something sooner? All these years of me making stupid comments about your job." "I tried in subtle ways," I interrupted. "But you weren't listening. And gradually I stopped trying, which was my mistake. Communication works both ways." Matthew reached across the table, hesitantly taking my hand. "What about Cambridge?" "That's the next part of our discussion," I said carefully. "But first I need to know, do you understand now? Truly understand the value of what I do?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Your job isn't just teaching, it's transforming lives. I saw that yesterday. And our lifestyle, our social connections, even some of my professional success, all of it has been influenced by your career more than I ever realized." I studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity, but found only genuine remorse and newfound respect. "Then we can discuss Cambridge as equals," I said, as partners making a significant decision together. 3 days later, we sat in Principal Harrison's office, Matthew in a suit, looking more nervous than I'd seen him at any client meeting, me in my professional attire, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of what we were about to propose. "Let me make sure I understand," Thomas said, looking between us. "You're suggesting a modified acceptance of the Cambridge Fellowship, with remote components and condensed in-person residency periods?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Dr. Whitman has agreed to a flexible arrangement. 3 two-month residencies spread throughout the year, with remote research and virtual lectures between visits. It allows me to maintain my position here while still participating in the fellowship." "And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" Thomas asked Matthew directly. "More than comfortable," Matthew replied. "I'm planning to use my accumulated vacation time to join Olivia during her second residency. My firm has an office in London that could use some attention from headquarters." Thomas smiled knowingly. Quite a change in perspective from what Olivia had described previously. Matthew nodded, a flush of embarrassment coloring his face. "I've received quite an education this week, one I apparently needed. The best students are those who recognize how much they have to learn," Thomas observed. "A principle I'm sure your wife has impressed upon countless young minds over the years." "She's a remarkable teacher," Matthew said, glancing at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, genuine admiration. I just needed to be in the right classroom to appreciate that. 6 months later, I stood at the lectern in Cambridge University's historic West Road Concert Hall, delivering my inaugural lecture as visiting fellow to a packed audience of international educators. My topic, Bridging Secondary and Higher Education, Innovative Approaches to Critical Analysis, had drawn academic interest from throughout Europe. From my position on stage, I could see Matthew in the front row, watching with undisguised pride as I fielded complex questions from distinguished professors and education policymakers. Since our educational intervention, as we now jokingly called it, he had become my most vocal advocate, even accompanying me to the National Education Conference where he'd enthusiastically networked with superintendents and curriculum directors. Our marriage had transformed, alongside his understanding of my profession. The dismissive comments had been replaced by genuine interest. The condescension had given way to respect. When his colleagues now asked about my career, Matthew spoke with authentic pride about my achievements, no longer diminishing my work to elevate his own. As the lecture concluded and applause filled the hall, Matthew approached the stage with a bouquet of flowers and a card I would later discover contained tickets to a weekend in Paris, a surprise celebration he'd arranged with colleagues at Cambridge. "Professor Blackwood," he said with a warm smile, using the title he now understood represented years of dedication and expertise. "Remarkable lecture. Though I'm not surprised, I've been fortunate enough to witness your teaching methods firsthand. And what did you learn from today's lesson?" I asked, continuing our private joke. "That I married an extraordinary educator," he replied without hesitation, "and that I'm still your most dedicated student." Later that evening, as we walked along the River Cam, Matthew stopped beneath a street lamp, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that dinner party," he said. "The one where I made that stupid comment about pretend work." "Ancient history," I assured him, though the memory still stung slightly. "Not to me," he insisted. "I've been wondering why I felt the need to diminish your career to impress those people. I think I was insecure. You? The confident investment director? The investment director who knows deep down that his wife is the more accomplished professional," he clarified. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that success only counted if it came with a certain salary and title. "I needed to put your work down to build mine up. And now?" I prompted gently. "Now I understand that real accomplishment isn't measured in million-dollar portfolios or corner offices." He squeezed my hand. "It's measured in lives changed. By that metric, Olivia, you're the most successful person I know." I leaned into him, feeling the last remnants of resentment dissolve. "We're both successful in different ways. That's the partnership I always wanted," Better late than never? He offered hopefully. Much better, I agreed. Though I reserve the right to assign remedial homework if you backslide. Fair enough, Matthew laughed. Though I should warn you, I've become quite fond of your teaching methods. As we continued our walk through the historic university town where scholars had pursued knowledge for centuries, I reflected on the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most valuable education happens not in classrooms or lecture halls, but in the moments when we find the courage to demand the respect our work deserves and the wisdom to recognize when that lesson has truly been learned. The real work of teaching, after all, isn't just imparting knowledge, it's transforming perspectives. By that measure, this had been my most successful lesson yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.